Welcome everyone to this morning's presentation on webinar on post-diagnostic dementia supports for people with an intellectual disability. My name is Professor Mary McCarran and you're very welcome this morning. We'll just give people another few moments. I know we have a lot of people who are registered, so we'll give people a few minutes to log on. Welcome everyone that's logging on to this morning's webinar on post-diagnostic dementia supports for people with an intellectual disability. We are giving people a couple of moments to log on. I am aware that we have people joining from different parts of the world, so you're all very welcome to sunny Dublin and sunny Ireland this morning. So thank you for that. Okay, well, in the interest of time, and we have a busy schedule, I'm just going to press on. So my name is Professor McCarran. I'm the director of the Trinity Centre for Ageing and Intellectual Disability and the PI of this project, which really was around the development of post-diagnostic dementia support for people with an intellectual disability. And I really do want to thank the Health Research Board and the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland who funded this particular project. And we have a number of short presentations, and we hope to be able to show you a short video clip, and we will have some time then for questions and answers at the end. I'm going to start off, I'm going to introduce the panel members and who are speaking today. So my colleague, Dr. Louise Daly, who was also worked with us on the project, on the development of the guidelines. Thank you, Louise. And the order that they're appearing in front of me, Professor Sean Kennelly. Professor Kennelly is the clinical director of the recently established National Intellectual Disability Memory Clinic for people with an intellectual disability. And Professor Kennelly will provide some background and context. I also want to introduce Dr. Pamela Dunn. Pamela will give a short, she's an advanced nurse practitioner in dementia, and Pamela will give a brief introduction and their work at Invista, an organisation supporting people with intellectual disability on the application of the post-diagnostic standards in practice. Mei-Lin Yap is also going to speak to us today. Mei-Lin you're going to see a short film, and Mei-Lin works with us as the Ambassador Liaison Officer at the Trinity Centre for Ageing and ID. And Mei-Lin has been a key part in the development of the guidelines, and in the video clips that we have developed, she led a PPI panel in the creation of this work, and the voiceover that you hear is all being narrated by Mei-Lin. I also want to welcome Rosemary Gowan, who's also going to be a participant on the panel. Rosemary is a HSE clinical lead for disability services, and lovely to have you with us, Rosemary, and thank you for that. And Laura O'Philippine, who is the Research and Policy Manager with the Alzheimer's Society. Thank you. I think that is everybody. I want to thank my own team here, particularly Miriam Fitzpatrick, who has done such work in putting today together, and Gavin Dan from the Trinity Centre here, who has supported today's webinar. Okay, so I'm going to start off, and I'm going to let Louise, I suppose, start us off with the background and the development of the guidelines.
Mary, I think would Sean be going first?
Oh, sorry, you're right. Sorry, apologies. I'm
No
actually
problem.
Chair, and thank you so much for that, Louise. And Sean is going to, Professor Sean Kennelly is going to give us an overview of the background and context of dementia in people with intellectual disability. Apologies, Professor Kennelly, and I'll hand over to you and you can upload your own presentation.
Not all. Good morning. I was nearly gazumped. That was perfect. So listen, I'm really delighted to be here this morning and chat through and give a little bit of background on the, if you like, the relationship between intellectual disability and dementia. And as you said, Mary, the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service, which I'm clinical director of and work along with many other talented people in, was established in 2020, 2021, and has been, I suppose, evolving over the last few years. I'm just going to try and move my slides on here, if that's okay. So I think, to make sure that we're all jumping off in the same spot is to look and reflect on what is dementia and what do we mean? Well, first thing is that dementia isn't a diagnosis in its own right. It's a term that we use, which describes whether, as a result of a memory or thinking problem, somebody's not able to do their day-to-day functionings as well as they would have done them before. It's often, described as an umbrella term in that it's not a diagnosis in its own right. And the most common question I get asked in clinic is, what's the difference between Alzheimer's disease and dementia? Because they're two terms that have been talked about with regards to memory for a long time. Alzheimer's disease is a diagnosis. It's the most common cause of dementia, and it's caused by two proteins in the brain that build up, and in particularly one protein, which we'll talk about in a little bit, which is of significant relevance to those people who are living with Down syndrome. But there's other causes of dementia, such as vascular disease, which is blood vessel disease or little stroke disease, Lewy body, which is caused by another protein called alpha-synuclein, which is related to Parkinson's disease, or frontotemporal dementia. So it's not just different proteins in the brain that might accumulate that cause these specific types of dementia. It's the part of the brain that's affected. So for example, in Alzheimer's disease, typically those proteins build up in the memory centers in the brain, in our temporal and parietal lobes, and that's why we get symptoms related to memory. Whereas in frontotemporal dementia, it can either accumulate in parts of the brain that are responsible for behavior or for language. So the types of protein and the area of the brain affected is what causes symptoms. The main risk factor for developing dementia is growing older. So we know about 1 in 20 people at the age of 65 may have dementia. That increases to about 1 in 5 people by the age of 80, and almost 1 in 2 people by the age of 90. So as we get older, the risk that we accumulate these proteins in the brain gets greater. And this has, of course, got significance for people with Down syndrome, because we've seen this really fortunate and excellent kind of increase in the life expectancy for people with Down syndrome, particularly over the last 2 decades, where much of the early life issues that they may encounter have been able to be addressed. So many of the other medical or surgical complications within those first years of life have been successful. In particular, cardiac surgery has improved. So we've seen this exponential increase in the life expectancy for people with Down syndrome. But as a result, what we've had to catch up with is the increased complexity that's required to make sure that the healthcare needs of people with Down syndrome are accommodated. I'm just going to try and move this ribbon here if I can, because it's kind of coming down over the slides. All right, so as I said, Alzheimer's disease is probably the most implicated of the dementia syndromes, which is associated with intellectual disability, and in particular with with people with Down syndrome. And from 1906, when Alois Alzheimer's described it, up until the mid-90s, there was very little progress with regards to our understanding of it and how we were going to treat it. But we've seen this very fortunate significant expansion in the first drugs for symptomatic management in the mid-90s, through to better imaging, blood-based biomarkers, CSF biomarkers, and actually in recent years, the first what we call disease-modifying therapies, the first therapies that may actually get in and remove this protein from the brain that we know is associated with the development of Alzheimer's disease, and therefore might reduce the risk of the progression of the condition. We're in still very, very early days, with regards to understanding how these therapies will fit in with the overall. And I suspect there'll be other therapies that will come along over the next few years that will supplant these ones. But it's a very exciting time from the point of view of how we've, really gotten to understand and better diagnose and better treat Alzheimer's disease as a condition. Key moment in this understanding was in the mid-80s, when actually the chromosome 21 and amyloid, this protein that's the main culprit protein for Alzheimer's disease, was identified. And that was actually identified through research looking at people with Down syndrome, who of course have trisomy 21. And when we look at dementia within the context of Down syndrome, it's almost always related towards the accumulation of this toxic protein called amyloid that builds up in the brain and ultimately kicks off this cascade, which leads to the death of certain brain cells, and as a result, reduced cognition and function. And this buildup of protein happens over years, but it's linked to that chromosome 21, that trisomy 21 that we know is part of Down syndrome, and this APP gene in particular, amyloid precursor protein, which is what increases the production of this protein. So for most people who develop Alzheimer's disease in the general population, it's a failure to clear protein from the brain over years and years and years that leads to its accumulation. For people with Down syndrome, it's as a result of a gene that's causing a huge overproduction of this protein that can lead to the symptoms. So actually, the big thing being that people with Alzheimer's disease can develop, or people with Down syndrome can develop Alzheimer's disease at a younger age than within the general population. So it can be that, in the general population, people may develop symptoms of Alzheimer's disease in around the early 70s is probably the average, whereas in people with Down syndrome, the development of symptoms may happen in the early 50s. Of course, it's not universal, but we know as people have been living longer, has been this relationship with the length of time people are living, and that marked increased risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And it's probably now one of the main medical problems or medical conditions that we need to manage in aging for people with Down syndrome, and it's recognized as its own genetically determined form of Alzheimer's disease. But other than that earlier time course, actually how Alzheimer's disease unfolds for people with Down syndrome is exactly the same as the general population. And we know that these proteins are probably present for about 10 years before this clinical symptom. So that gives opportunity for us, hopefully, when we get to new therapies, to be able to remove those proteins and alter that risk of somebody developing dementia in later life. What about non-Down intellectual disability? And what we know is the incidence of dementia can be 5 times higher in people with non-Down syndrome intellectual disability versus the general population. And there's lots of different, complexities underlying that. Sometimes, the intellectual disability might be as a result of a genetic cause that has its own connection with the development of dementia in later life, and even some of those non-genetic causes. But what's clear is, we rarely have a diagnosis for the cause of ID. There's often comorbid psychiatric diagnosis, blood vessel risks or vascular comorbid risks such as high blood pressure and high cholesterol can be more common. And it's really important that we have a longitudinal follow-up, that we're able to measure and exactly see, how things progress in that population, to be able to make an accurate diagnosis. And of course, the other confounding factor always is these high levels of other medicines that can change chemistry within the brain, such as antipsychotic medicines, anticholinergic medicines, which can actually change the chemistry of the brain so that people may have symptoms that look like they have memory loss, when in fact actually the medicine may be driving it rather than any neurodegenerative process. Why is dementia so important? Well, really, I often describe it as this common thread between so many of these issues associated with morbidity and disability in later life, such as incontinence and frailty and falls and delirium, which often kick off this cascade. And dementia is often that unifying feature that means that these other issues happen, which ultimately can have somebody requiring institutionalization before they otherwise would have required it. So it's very important, and any strategy that kind of targets or reduces that risk or helps us identify it earlier so that we're able to put management plans in place or support somebody through that post-diagnostic pathway, such as these practice guidelines, is therefore really, really essential. And of course, clinical diagnosis in this population is very, very complicated because of this variety of baseline symptoms and ID severity. Oftentimes people might be developing memory symptoms when they're having transitions of care. So it's at that stage of life where it might be moving from family home into residential care, or between different levels of care in residential care. Seizures are very common, and as a result of seizures, people can have symptoms exacerbating or waxing and waning or fluctuating, which makes it difficult. Comorbid illness and multiple medication, and medication burden being a very significant event. Life events can happen, including death of parents and other significant events, such as giving up work. And of course, poorly managed pain and constipation and a difficulty articulating it can be a really, can all make diagnosing dementia in this population very, very complicated, and it's something that we need to be careful about. And oftentimes one of the best and most important decisions we give within the NIDMs is not diagnosing dementia and saying we need to have another look in a little bit of time. So that's where really the national and the principles of the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service came from. It's an all, we accept referrals from all over Ireland, from general practitioners, psychiatrists, psychologists within service, and from other secondary care professionals. And it's really about, trying to ensure people get a safe, timely centered dementia assessment and diagnosis, that the perspective of the person aging with ID is taken into account, to support people and services in training, in other services with regards to post-diagnostics, and then also, of course, from the point of view of research and how we might be able to incorporate future therapies, into the care of people living with ID and dementia. So it's very much a quick whistle-stop tour to try and set the team, and I just want to thank all the colleagues I work with in the National ID Memory Service. I'll stop sharing there.
Thank you very much, Professor Kennelly. I think that has been a wonderful development, and great to have this expertise and bringing the expertise that has been built up over many years in mainstream geriatrics and gerontology and the mainstream memory clinics, and bring that to I suppose support this increasingly at risk population. I'm going to move on to the second speaker, and it is Louise. Sorry, now Louise. Back to the previous slide. Just getting this loaded. I need to.
Thanks, Mary.
One slide. Yeah.
Great. I'll just turn off my camera for this piece. Hello, everybody, and I'm delighted to be here this morning. It's a privilege on behalf of the research team to be able to present an overview of the methods used in the study that led to the guidelines that are being launched here today. So just a little bit of background as to why the study was devised. So as we've just seen, people with an intellectual disability age, health problems associated with aging have become more evident. And one such health concern is a higher prevalence and earlier onset for some of dementia compared to the general population. So it's therefore critical that inclusive, best practice post-diagnostic dementia supports are available for people with an intellectual disability and informed by evidence-based guidelines. So in terms of the aim of our study, we set out to develop accessible best practice guidelines for post-diagnostic dementia supports for people with an intellectual disability in Ireland. And to achieve the aim, the objectives seen here on the screen were formulated. We used a multi-staged mixed methods research approach informed by Fetters et al. With data triangulation, and we adopted the good reporting of a mixed method study, or GRAMS, to inform the reporting outcomes. So given the complexity of the study and the multiple participant and stakeholder groups, ethical standards were a priority for us, and therefore ethical approvals were obtained from our own Faculty of Health Sciences in Trinity, local participating services where required, and a consent declaration from the Health Research Consent Declaration Committee was also obtained. So we can move to the next screen there. Thank you. So our working definition of post-diagnostic dementia support, which really kept us grounded and centred throughout the study, it was informed by the work of Gibb et al., who referred to the definition of the concept from the Irish Dementia Post-Diagnostic Steering Group, who described the concept as enabling and assisting people with dementia and their families to living a life of their choosing throughout the continuum of dementia. So in this regard, post-diagnostic supports include interventions, therapeutic treatments and activities that build on strengths and abilities and help to maintain and enhance quality of life. The study, as you can see on the screen, contained 5 work packages. The first involved a scoping review of the research literature relating to post-diagnostic dementia supports and focus group interviews with people involved in the provision of such supports. In our second work package, a purpose-designed survey instrument was completed by a number of key staff in services across Ireland, identified through the National Federation of Voluntary Service Providers Network and the Health Services Executive. Work packages 3 and 4 involved qualitative interviews to explore experiences in more depth. More specifically, work package 3 involved people with intellectual disability and dementia, their families and staff carers, while work package 4 involved interviews with staff carers, management and family members in services identified as exemplars of best practice for post-diagnostic supports. And then in the final work package, which was work package 5, data from the first 4 work packages were triangulated to inform the post-diagnostic dementia support guidelines. In terms of analysis, given we had very different forms of data collected, we employed a number of different approaches to the analysis and integration of the data. So as you can see, the scoping review was informed by the approach of Arksey and O'Malley and Levac et al., and our focus group data in work package 1 we thematically analysed. The survey data was descriptively analysed using SPSS version 26, and there were a number of open text responses on the survey, and these were categorised and summarised. In work packages 3 and 4, the qualitative data we collected was analysed using the 6-step reflexive thematic approach of Braun and Clark, and we used NVivo software to help us store, manage, and analyse the data. And finally, in work package 5, the triangulation of the data was worked through from work packages 1 to 4, and we used data display table to inform the guideline production. We also employed an additional methodology which was central to the conduct of the study. So we had an advisory panel, and this panel, we were extremely lucky to have national and international experts in post-diagnostic dementia supports for people with an intellectual disability. And these experts represented different forms of expertise, and we also had stakeholders with lived experience. So this advisory panel met on a number of occasions over the course of the study. And in 2 of those panel meetings, we employed a virtual collective intelligent workshop methodology. Now, this methodology is created when people work together, often with the help of technology, and they were virtual, to mobilize a wider range of information, ideas, and insights to address a social challenge. So the workshops were expertly facilitated by the Public and Patient Involvement Ignite Programme Manager here in Trinity, and participants were enabled to use software, Miro software or Miro board technology, which enabled us all to be able to contribute in a dynamic and live fashion. So we were able to put our responses together using that. So attendees were provided with updates on the findings and asked to generate ideas based on the evidence and their experience. So just briefly, we'll take you through the work package findings, and these are in brief. As you can imagine, it was quite a complex process. So in work package 1, we had 42 studies included in the scoping review, and in the focus group data in work package 1, we had 20 participants who participated. And as you can see, the thematic findings from both are displayed on the screen there for you. An analysis of this data led to the thematic findings you can see, and then the findings from this work package informed following work packages, while also providing knowledge of the available empirical and experiential evidence that was known. So In terms of the second work package, this, as you will recall, was the survey. So work package 2, we aimed to understand the current landscape of post-diagnostic support for people with an intellectual disability. And the survey was purpose designed. It was uploaded using and distributed using Qualtrics software. And the questions based on the findings from work package 1 and input from both the advisory panel and other stakeholders were used to devise the survey, which was then piloted. The survey involved examination of a number of key areas, some of which included service information, dementia care planning, and barriers to support. We had 58 responses overall, and you can see the geographic distribution there overviewed on the screen. So just some of the selected findings. So 74% of services were reported supporting people with dementia or either had a suspected diagnosis of dementia. And 79% of services supported people with Down syndrome aged 30 and above, while 76% of services reported supporting people with Down syndrome aged 60 and over. In terms of the most common reported barriers to providing quality dementia care in residential or group homes, among those services reported providing such care, 83% cited funding, 70% the physical environment, and 62% skill mix. And the most common reported barriers to providing quality dementia care to those living independently or in the family home, among services reporting they provided care in this setting, 79% reported the physical environment as not being dementia capable, 77% reported aging health needs of family caregivers, while 71% reported family caregivers being overwhelmed as issues. And on this screen, we have an example of another survey question. So if a person from your service with a diagnosis of dementia has been transferred to a nursing home, please indicate why the person was transferred. And of the 26 service responses, you can see that some of the key areas, reasons for this are cited there on the screen. So work package 3 then, and this was the work package in which we conducted research that really focused on the experience of the person living with intellectual disability and dementia. We had 12 participants in this work package, and we were lucky enough to recruit 3 people who had a diagnosis of dementia. And we also interviewed family caregiver members and staff caregivers, but the focus of this work package was on reported and actual experiences of the person. So we used semi-structured interviews, and for persons with a diagnosis of dementia, they were offered the opportunity to use photo or artifact elicitation, so to bring an item of meaningfulness with regard to the aim of the study to the study, and there were questions asked to around the meaning of those items. So topics discussed included what was important in the person's life, current supports offered, which were most useful, and any worries or concerns for the future. So just in brief, we had 4 findings in relation to this aspect of the study. The first theme was being me, a sense of self through connection and valued life pursuits. And we had 3 sub-themes here: the importance of community and socializing, connection through familiarity, and activities and hobbies. Our second theme centered around meeting the social and personal needs of the person. And people told us that they liked creative and compassionate solutions to care. Communication was fundamental to maintaining a sense of self and connection. And familiarity was a very big sub-theme in this study, in terms of familiarity in care provision and the experience of care as the foundation of a good life with dementia. In theme 3, formal processes that support people with dementia and intellectual disability were identified, and sub-themes included the importance of multidisciplinary support and interdisciplinary working across the dementia continuum, and satisfaction with the supports in place. And the final theme in this work package was challenges in supporting people while living with dementia and intellectual disability. And participants talk about their experiences when support was not available, the impact of caring on carers themselves, and the need for appropriate and timely information and training that extended across all involved individuals. Work package 4 then also was a qualitative work package, and this aimed to identify best practice approaches to post-diagnostic care from specialist intellectual disability service providers. Here we also conducted a number of single interviews with key and staff and management and family members at exemplar sites. So the key questions that were asked in this work package centered around the steps involved and the resources required in setting up post-diagnostic supports, who provides such supports, are there supports for aging in place of choice, was there supports available for caregivers, and service plans for the future, having already established care in this field. We identified 3 themes in this work package. So post-diagnostic supports, and there were exemplars of current good practices, how we might go about sustaining good care, and then the 3rd theme related to strengthening such supports. So I'm going to hand over now to Professor McCarran, who's going to talk about the development of the guidelines and the guidelines themselves.
Thank you very much, Louise. So as Louise mentioned, we had a lot of data from a lot of different sources, and I think that's what has added to the strength of the guidelines we have come up with. So we worked together around triangulation of the various work packages, and they were organised according to the data and the persona, whether it was from an expert advisory panel, whether it was from somebody with a diagnosis or a service manager. And then we spent long hours here at the Trinity Centre working on all of this data, capturing the various themes from the different persona, and then grouping all of those together. So the development, we came up really with a number of thematic areas. And the first theme was around foundational concepts underpinning post-diagnostic support, the importance of an enabling and an empowering environment and inclusivity that emerged right across all the work packages. Actively sustaining a good life was key, establishing and maintaining person-centeredness, and establishing and maintaining meaningful connectedness. So they were what we call, these were the foundational concepts. These are absolutely key to good dementia, post-diagnostic dementia support. Theme 2 then, prerequisites of post-diagnostic care, included knowledge of the person and how this changed over time. This long-term, this relationship concept of relationship-based care and knowing the individual. Appropriate diagnosis and disclosure. This was identified right across all of the work packages that we done as being, you know, there was different standards happening throughout the country with respect to how this was happening, and there was difference in terms of the care packages available. So they identified a number of important areas. Then theme 3 was around infrastructure and personnel components for post-diagnostic care, looking at much more integration across organisations and across structures and services, the need for collaboration across teams, and the need for skilled personnel to support people living with dementia, and also the key need for support for those providing care. And we spoke earlier on about the family caregivers and indeed often staff caregivers who felt without these proper supports that people were really quite overwhelmed. Then the processes and process components of post-diagnostic support included having advanced care planning, aging in place came through right across the packages as something that people wanted, environmental support that needed to be available to enable this to happen, working with and supporting families and carers, and meaningful engagement and psychosocial interventions, and this concept of a good death. And then the factors impacting overall on post-diagnostic support, and we talked a little bit about resourcing, both financial resourcing, staffing, environmental supports, the availability of supports across geographical regions. They appear to be quite inequity across the country. Some areas had very well developed services and some organisations, and other services had very little. Attitudes and understanding, and then the current policy landscape, particularly now the new model of dementia care for Ireland, which has just been launched in the last couple of years, and where intellectual disability services fit into that, and how we can move forward with that model to support this population. So the key guidelines then and the thematic areas that emerged were living one's best life, an enabling infrastructure, to build awareness, understanding and skills, a lot around education, carer support, the support that makes care possible, inclusion, a sense of place and community. And you've heard all of these terms being mentioned right throughout the morning across the various packages. So this is the standards. There's a brief report that we have developed and published on the development of the standards and then the standards themselves. So we now we defined 5 pillars of post-diagnostic supports with 33 accompanying standards. So pillar 1, as I said, to live one's best life. Pillar 2 is a sense of place and community. Pillar 3, building awareness, understanding and skills. Pillar 4, an enabling infrastructure. And pillar 5, promoting autonomy, enablement and health, with the person with an intellectual disability and dementia always at the centre of care. So each pillar is interconnected and they're all highly dependent upon each other, and they must be considered in their entirety. The standards are dynamic, evidence-based, and can be added to, amended or subtracted as needs change or as evidence evolves. And each pillar has a standard statement and an associated process guideline. And I'm going to try to show you what they look like now. So pillar 1, to live one's best life. So this is some points from the standard statement. It's underpinned by the understanding that well-being and quality of life can be enjoyed throughout the continuum of dementia. It is created and sustained through supportive environments, social connectedness, and total communication approaches. Supporting the person living with dementia must begin with an understanding of the life enjoyed by the person and use a strengths-based, creative, and compassionate approach. So it's a standard statement for each of the guidelines. And then there is a host of, to live one's best life, there is a number then of individual guidelines. So sensitively reflect and try to understand the person's perspective, how they are coping with the diagnosis, and work with the person addressing questions and concerns. Establish how the person wants to live their life, respecting and supporting the individual to exercise self-determination, experience a sense of control, and to live a life of their choosing. Ensure the communication environment facilitates meaningful conversations through respectful, sensitive, person-centered, and total communication approaches. Ensure the physical environment enables the person to contribute, promoting a sense of belonging, well-being, confidence, and safety, and supporting self-management. And ensure the social environment supports meaningful connections with family, friends, and important others in the person's life, and it promotes a sense of well-being. And ensure there's relationship continuity with consistency of staff caregivers, stability in the living environment, and flexibility to accommodate fluctuating abilities. So this is what when you open up the standards, this is just an example. So you will have your pillar, you'll have your standard statement at the top, which I've just read from. Then you will have your guidelines, and I talked there about a lot of guidelines, but it's no point in giving the guidelines, we felt, without giving people useful tips to how to action those guidelines. So the process of implementing the guidelines are also documented for each of the standard guidelines. So the process and how you would do it. We have also embedded useful links throughout the standards to enable people to access additional information that you may require. So that's just what the standards look like. So your standard statement, your standard guideline, and the process, how you actually achieve that particular standard. And the voice of experience, being able to read body language is so important, because you know if their communication is poor. So you really need to know the person to be able to read their body language, to understand, you know, if they're feeling down, if they're feeling good, if they are a little bit agitated or anxious, and how to manage that. So these was all, so when we talk about things like continuity of staff, stability in the environment, person-centeredness, relationship-based care, we really need to understand how we're going to action those in reality. So the second pillar is a sense of place in community. And this pillar is underpinned by the importance of knowing people and being known within one's community. Maintaining an individual personhood and life skills requires being able to continue social connectedness, lifelong interest and hobbies. And if a person living with dementia has to change or move between settings, all care partners must work together to create a seamless transition. So that is the standard statement. And then there is a whole list of guidelines in terms of how you would achieve that standard statement, how you would enable the person to contribute to their environment, upholding their identity, dignity, and sense of belonging, supporting the person in maintaining and making desired changes in familiar relationships and social connectedness and networks, work to create dementia-inclusive local communities and build and maintain social connectedness and relationships, utilize compassionate, tailored, and timely supports to assist the person to live in their desired home. And if the person has to move from their care setting, care transitions must be planned with relationship building, working in partnership to ensure a smooth and seamless transition. Develop and implement care plans that maintain a sense of place, home, and community, and actively maintain the person's desired activities to support the normal day-to-day rhythm of life and ensure there are stimulating things to look forward to which bring joy. And then for each of those, similar to what I've said before, there is useful tips in trying to support people, how to do these things, how to build a sense of place of community, how to build familiar relationships, how to create dementia-inclusive environments. And there's useful links then provided that people can access, as I said, additional information. So this is a voice of experience again. He literally went head first into dementia with COVID, because you see, myself and him are very social, and we'd be out and about visiting family, and all of a sudden it was just the two of us, and family were only able to come as far as the door. So his whole world crashed. He stopped going to daycare, he stopped going bowling, he stopped Special Olympics, he stopped material arts, he stopped seeing all his sisters and brothers, he stopped seeing my kids. So it really just showed you the huge impact that COVID has had on the cognitive health of people. And oftentimes people just never fully have recovered from the isolation that they endured during that time. Then pillar 3 is around building awareness, understanding and skills, and ensuring that people understand the complexity of dementia. And Professor Kennelly has spoken about the need for this comprehensive diagnostic workup and what the National ID Memory Clinic offered. But people with an intellectual disability, and what we're really saying is the need for this timely assessment. What people said when we did surveys throughout the country was that very often the struggle to get timely assessment, and it depended on what part of the country that you lived in. I think now with the National ID Memory Clinic, we have answered that. And we also know that there's very good level 2 clinics already embedded within intellectual disability services, and our role is continuing to support those clinics as well. And carers need to know how to access supports and training, and must build a collaborative, supportive network. And again, the guidelines is we have education around building awareness on the increased risk of dementia, ensuring access to a dedicated memory service, ensuring that the person living with dementia is provided with timely and appropriate information. This is all around the development of easy read materials, etc. providing information and skills building for families, providing timely, tailored and appropriate support for peers. So people who are living in group homes who also have an intellectual disability, it's really important that we have peer training programs, and we have developed a lot of materials around this, and providing education then for health and social care staff, and developing a collaborative culture. And again, this is what it will look like. And this is just one page because there is numerous standards, but this is just, again, shows you the format in terms of the standard guidelines. So visiting people and the old people who I know locally, but not a stranger, you know, and people living back anywhere. The locals are important to me because they know my name and my nature. And that was a quote from somebody with an intellectual disability. So just so important for people. Then an enabling infrastructure. This pillar is very much underpinned by the understanding that infrastructure, environment and resourcing was required. We spoke about this, Louise spoke about it right across the work packages. This came up as a major concern. The person living with dementia should have access to relevant dedicated services, regardless of their place of residence. We found a lot of inequity across the country in terms of supports that were available. And enabling infrastructure will support carers and enable people to give care with comfort and with safety, creating a positive environment for all, the person living with dementia, both the recipient and those who are giving care. And again, we have here data on an enabling infrastructure, how you do this, talking about things like developing collaboration, cross-sectional working, and creating problem solving to support an enabling dementia environment, developing pathways of care that will support integration. And in the process then, we outline how you do this, conducting an organizational audit of the home and community hubs, day and other services to ensure that the environment is dementia inclusive and supports those living with dementia. And we have given examples of audit tools that can be used, etc., in the guidelines and links to other resources. And ensure the person living with dementia is supported to engage in meaningful life pursuits that bring joy, and building capacity and resilience among staff and family and peers to help prevent and address things like compassion fatigue, burnout, unresolved grief and loss. And this came out very strongly across the various work packages that we were involved in. And again, there you can see all the various links to additional resources in terms of how to support the building of an enabling infrastructure. And this is, again, somebody living with an intellectual disability, living with dementia, a voice of experience. Mike Denver is like first class. I do like the concerts and friends, yeah. And the Music Society is my favorite as well. It's happy, like, do you know what I mean? So really understanding the person, what's important, and building an enabling infrastructure around the individual to enable them continue in these valued life pursuits. And then the final pillar, promoting autonomy, enablement and health, is underpinned by placing the person at the centre of care and promoting autonomy and enablement. Planning for the future and deciding on end-of-life care is important for every person living with dementia. But also often we don't talk about these issues until dementia is very advanced, and we end up with crisis decision-making, where we're making decisions which are very emotionally charged, and oftentimes this ends up with a difficult decision and very distressing for everyone. So we talk about, we have created resources around end-of-life care planning, and they're all available from the website as well. And it's all around optimizing comfort and reducing distress for the person living with dementia and their caregivers. And again, this is the standard guideline, allowing adequate time for the person to process information, avoid outpacing, avoid rushing care, which risks overwhelming and distressing the person. It takes people living with dementia time to process information. Providing reasonable adjustments to care that will empower and support the individual's personal preferences in dress and grooming style helping the person to feel confident and good about themselves, supporting the person maintain routines like bathing and unusual routine habits that's grounded in the person's personal preferences and their lifelong habits. Like if the person never had a shower or never had a bath, maybe that's not a good idea. If they never liked to wear makeup or always like to wear makeup, well then ensure that you support the person continue with these lifelong habits. Conduct regular health assessment and monitor, prevent and treat comorbid health conditions. And Professor Kennelly spoke at length about so many of the comorbid conditions that people are likely to have. And just because you have dementia, it does not mean that you don't need your pain treated. So it's really important that other conditions which will improve the quality of life for people are treated. And take an individualised and preventative approach to dental care. We have shown through the work that we have done, we have a lot of, huge issues with oral and dental care. And very often this is a real source of pain and distress for people. Then nutritional assessment to ensure good nutrition, meal enjoyment and safety, and ensure that the non-cognitive symptoms are understood and responded to, and offer end-of-life responses. And again, here's the process and how you will do each of these. This is just, again, one example. But for each of those standards I've spoken about, there is a process guideline and useful tips to help the person action those. So again, the voice of experience, she would always have been a great fan of having her hair and her nails done and stuff like that. She still does enjoy that, and she likes to be complimented on it as well. So maintaining this self of self, I always feel that the most devastating loss of all for somebody living with dementia is a loss of a sense of themselves. So in summary, post-diagnostic supports are should be resourced and available to support quality of life and well-being. Importance of input from people with intellectual disability and dementia themselves on the kind of supports that they would consider or they would like to have and that they consider is necessary. And these guidelines are intended to address these gaps in available and proposed models of care. So staff need to understand and to know the person. They need to understand dementia. They need to think ahead, and they need to be able to predict stressors. People living with dementia need to have and to be stress-free, failure-free, individualized care and consistency without time pressure. So this, I'm hoping now that we can show a short video of the standards, and thanks to Mei-Lin Yap and her team. So this is to support people with an intellectual disability themselves and peers and other carers. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Miriam is going to show this. Great.
Pillar 1. To live one's best life with dementia. Be sensitive and try to understand how the person is dealing with the diagnosis of dementia. Work with the person to understand questions or worries they might have. Support the person to choose the life they want to live. Talk with the person using respectful, sensitive language that is appropriate for the person. Make sure the person's life continues to be home-like and offers a sense of belonging, well-being, confidence and safety. Make sure the person is supported to maintain important connections with family, friends and other important people in their life. Make sure there is consistency of staff, stability in person's home, and flexibility to accommodate changing abilities.
Thank you very much, Mei-Lyn, for that. And for each of the standards, there is a short film again that is there to support a different understanding and to help people to understand each of the standard guidelines differently. So thank you, Mei-Lyn, for that. I'm going to hand over now to Pamela, who also is going to talk now about the implementation of these in practice and what that looks like. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you, Mary. You have the presentation there, do you? Or my?
You. Have you got it there, Pamela?
I have, yeah. Okay, can you see it there now?
Yeah, if you want to bring it up on slideshow, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So when we start with and the first pillar to one's best life with dementia, I think it's such a lovely heading, the life enjoyed and the life desired. So when we support a person living with dementia, we must begin with an understanding of the life enjoyed and the life desired by the person. In Avista, we have conducted a feasibility study on the creative use of digital life stories for adults at an increased risk of developing dementia as they age. And by capturing and sharing personal narratives through photos, film, audio, and text, participants preserve their digital life stories that demonstrate the life they have lived, their personalities, their strengths, and their valued relationships. Through our feasibility study, we have shown that digital life stories serve as a powerful tool for enhancing meaningful communication and supporting relationship-based, person-centred care. This approach has been well received by individuals, and primarily it is a very fun activity. It's thoroughly enjoyable, but also brings huge benefits to families and carers in really getting the essence and understanding of the person and what's important to them. We also look at the social environment and the importance of the social environment and in using a strengths-based approach to support the person to engage with others. And as we saw very much from Louise there in Pillar 3, the lived experience, the importance of familiarity and maintaining a sense of connection through valued life pursuits. This is something I believe we're very good at in intellectual disability services. Social connectedness in Avista is promoted through celebrating life events with family and friends and through the continued engagement with the local community. When we look at enabling environments to support, to support the person to maintain past interests and perhaps to explore, sorry, I've moved on again too fast there, sorry. In Avista, we are supporting people in a variety of physical environments throughout our Dublin, Limerick and Tipperary homes. So we would have community-based homes and campus settings and our specialist purpose-built homes, Willowview and Meadowview. Central to all settings is the use of the environment to create a welcoming environment that minimises stress for the person and provides opportunities for meaningful engagement. Should the person need to move from their home to a higher support setting, personalised transition plans are in place through the collaboration of the person's circle of support. And we find this to be hugely beneficial and really important. And then, as we said, maintaining person's menu of life-enhancing activity and their desired activities, the importance of familiarity. So here we have the menu of life-enhancing pursuits, which looks at the culture, physical, social and solitary. And each menu is personalised to the individual. This tool is used in our specialist dementia home, and it's also been funded from the NMPDU to use this within a campus setting to look at the strategic development of this out to a wider group of people. Avista's memory assessment has a long history of providing diagnostic services for people with intellectual disability. And we've been very fortunate to have Professor Mary McCarran as our policy and service advisor for many years. we've published a longitudinal study following 77 adults with Down syndrome over 20 years. And throughout that time, then Avista, we gained from understanding the experiences of these individuals. Avista were very happy to share their experience and to be part of the tripartite along with 20 Centre for Ageing and Intellectual Disability and Tala University Hospital that set up the National Intellectual Disability Memory Service. And we heard from Professor Kennelly on that earlier, and it's a fantastic service. The key components of the Avista Memory Service are staff training, that people with dementia receive care and support from staff who have the prerequisite knowledge and skills to perform their role effectively. Secondly, by addressing the modifiable risk factors, we know from the Lancet reports that there are 14 modifiable risk factors affecting possibly reducing dementia by up to 45%. In Avista, we provide peer education and personalised brain health plans for those at risk of developing dementia. There is a clear referral pathway, and all persons in Avista at over the age of 35 years with Down syndrome are offered annual baseline dementia screening and assessment. And throughout this assessment process, it should also assist us in addressing the modifiable risk factors. We then worked for a diagnostic workup, a consensus diagnosis, and should the person meet criteria for dementia, it's communicating that diagnosis if desired. And we would use easy read material with a focus on quality throughout. So the post-dementia guidelines support us then in daily practice, and it's fantastic today to be at this launch with these very meaningful guidelines. In Avista, one of the ways that we use these guidelines in daily practice is we have, as throughout the country, I would well imagine there are morning meetings at handovers where we discuss plans of the day and what's going on for individuals. And this informal opportunity for training is used in Avista, where we look at the guidelines. So each month we pick a pillar of the month. So this here is pillar 5, promoting autonomy, enabling health. And then within each week, within that, we pick a sub-standard. So this here is looking at 5.6, talking about the non-cognitive symptoms of dementia. So this allows a time in the morning where staff would reflect on what we're doing in service, and just having that moment of reflection. And as we look, as Mary says, through the process, saying, are we doing that process? Are we doing things differently? And then going into the words, if we say, be alert to assess for unmet needs, what does that actually mean for us? What does avoid confrontation mean? And what does using empathy mean? So kind of reflecting and going into these standards. So that's one idea we use at our morning meetings. So thanks to Professor Mary McCarran and the team at Avista, we have recently published our 5-year dementia strategy. This strategy is built on the key targets set out in the Model of Dementia Care in Ireland, and it sets out a clear roadmap for the Avista Memory Service for the next 5 years. It's a very exciting time for us as we're looking to the next 5 years and building on the memory service that we have. And lastly, when we talk about post-diagnostic care, in Avista, we mean this to mean all support from time of diagnosis to final days. This involves adapting to the needs of the person as dementia progresses and providing rigorous symptom management. We recognise the individuality of each individual, their physical, social, spiritual and psychological needs. We also recognise the needs of the family and the circle of support that the person has and their valued relationships, and provide opportunities to maintain those relationships and to offer emotional support. We offer advanced care plan meetings regularly, and these are reviewed to document the person's will and preference and honour and respect their values and their wishes. And as I said, it is 10 years since the opening of our specialist dementia home in Willoughview and Meadowview. And since opening in 2013, we've supported many people to live and to die well. Over that time, we have supported many people who have died in their home in Willoughview and Meadowview, surrounded by staff and family who know them well. And this has been a great privilege. So as Mary said, the guidelines are interconnected and all pillars contribute to supporting the person to live and to die well with the diagnosis of dementia. And we very much would mirror that in Vista. So this is just a little bit on our home in Willowview and Meadowview. And the video is available online for those who would like to look at that home. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you very much, Pamela. That's wonderful, and it's nice to see in an organisation how we're actually implementing and operationalising these standards on a day-to-day basis. Okay, I'm going to hand over to Dr. Laura Philippine, maybe who might give a response to what you've heard or your thoughts on both on the standards and their application, Laura.
Of course. So look, on behalf of the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland, I'm just so delighted to welcome these new guidelines and to be here for their launch this morning. I think we can all agree it's been a fascinating morning and really interesting to learn about how exactly they've come to fruition. And I think the experience, the expertise, the thoughtfulness and the dedication that has gone into this work is just so evident. And I would really like to extend my sincere appreciation to everyone involved in bringing this project to fruition. The Alzheimer's Society of Ireland was really thrilled to co-fund this research alongside the Health Research Board through the HRC-HRB joint funding scheme. And this was actually one of the first large projects that was funded in my time here at the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland. And we make our funding decisions in conjunction with people living with dementia, care partners, and frontline staff in the organisation. And so they assessed the heart of the project, and then we left the scientific assessments to the Health Research Board. But I actually have a really clear memory of those deliberation meetings, and the need for this work had just resonated so clearly with our staff and with people affected by dementia. You know, they really wanted to ensure that nobody was left behind, and were absolutely thrilled when Professor McCarran and her team were awarded this funding. We know that dementia is a life-changing diagnosis, but the quality of support that follows can really shape that experience for people. You know, this project addresses a critical gap for individuals with an intellectual disability who are diagnosed with dementia, you know, a group that we all know here has been historically overlooked. And I think it's clear today just how useful, accessible, inclusive, and holistic this work is, and it definitely brings us great hope for the future. I think it offers a future where people with intellectual disabilities and dementia receive the care, understanding, and support they need from the very beginning of their journey. And now with this work, we have a roadmap, and we're really, really excited to support the continuation of this important work. So thank you very much for having me, and congratulations on such an excellent piece of work.
Thank you very much, Laura, and thank you for all of your support, both in helping with the funding for this. But I mean, I think the fantastic work of the Alzheimer's Society, and we can use this. I know we work a lot and we speak to your dementia care advisor, so this is something that they can have in their toolkit as well as they meet with people who need support. So thank you so much for that. I will ask Rosemary Gowan, who's the HSE clinical lead. Perhaps maybe, Rosemary, you might want to give a short response and talk about their application. Yeah, great.
Great. Thanks, Mary, and thanks everyone for the presentations this morning. I'm absolutely delighted to have the opportunity to be part of this webinar today to launch the guidelines. And as always, I'm very impressed by the comprehensive work of ISD Tilda and the team, and this work certainly reflects that. And I want to just congratulate everybody involved. Before I talk a little bit about the role of the National Clinical Programme for People with Disabilities, I'm conscious to reflect on where I began my life as a residential support worker, working with people with intellectual disabilities, supporting them to live in their own home in the community. And you know, having reviewed the guidelines and listened to the presentations today, and looking at, you know, what Avista are doing to implement the guidelines, the word joy, and it was great to see that in the guidelines, is really important, and brings me back to the work that I did and the joy that I had working with people with intellectual disabilities before I I went on to do occupational therapy and on to work in the University of Limerick. So just to reflect that, and it's really great to see. And so the National Clinical Programme for People with Disabilities works to support the implementation of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And we're working to develop a rights-based, evidence-informed, effective model to support models of care and guidance. So an implementation plan for any guidance is critical. And I think, you know, we've seen the example from Avista this morning, but also it's to look at how these guidance can be implemented in an effective way, and that, you know, that we're not just looking at glossy documents, that we're looking at ensuring that all the comprehensive work that's happened is implemented. And I just kind of really wanted to just give a brief synopsis of my reflections on the guidance, and just to note that, you know, the National Clinical Programme, we work in an interdisciplinary way across the life course, and we work across all the health and social care sectors, and work to engage with lead agencies, government departments and educational institutions. And I think it's really important that we work to support the implementation of these guidance and ensure that we see best practice across the sector. So what we can see is, you know, from just kind of to summarize in relation to what I've heard this morning, there's a huge amount of work utilizing mixed methods. We see, you know, 5 key pillars to in relation to post-diagnostic supports, which encapsulate ways to support people to live their best lives with appropriate supports, and understanding the skills needed to support people to stay connected to familiar people, places, home and community in a dignified way. And there are many elements that are highlighted in these guidelines that are, I suppose, fundamental to health and well-being for all people. However, we need to build an added awareness in relation to being, and I would say maybe an awareness, I think it's moving beyond awareness to a consciousness that drives our actions to build sustainable infrastructure to meet people's needs following diagnosis of dementia, and to understand the complexity involved, particularly when they have pre-existing intellectual disability, communication challenges, staff challenges, or staff changes, I should say, physical and mental health, and also the issues around polypharmacy, which is reflected within the guidance. And there's a need, and you know, Mary presented in detail, you know, all the pillars, but she talked about, you know, the sensitivity, respect, communication, connection, continuity and consistency, and sustainability or stability within the environment, and in the importance that there's flexibility to accommodate the changing needs of people, and any changes to support a move from a more familiar place should be well planned to ensure smooth and seamless transition, supporting people to maintain the day-to-day rhythm and stimulate things to look forward to and bring joy to people's lives. And this all sounds really wonderful and makes a lot of sense. However, we all know that implementing any guideline is challenging without a well-structured and collaborative implementation plan. And I can see from Pamela's presentation this morning that there's been lots of support, and that Avista are working to implement these guidance, really moving the theory into practice. So the National Clinical Programme are delighted to work with IDS Tilda to develop an implementation plan, and this would include dissemination, advocacy and awareness, and using mixed methods of, you know, in relation to education, training, teaching and learning methods, and also to develop maybe digital resources. And I see from May-Lynn's presentation in relation to the already online resources to communicate the content of the guidelines, which is really important. And we could also work in partnership with the National Disability Team and other implementation groups within the HSE to support this. We need to also support people, key stakeholders, to reflect on their current practice and collectively to implement the guidelines in a sustainable way, so that it becomes part of the everyday, and that we're not just talking about it, that we're actually consciously working to support people post-dementia diagnosis to live their best lives. And we know that it's going to be challenging, but we need to embrace that challenge together. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Rosemary, and great to, to work with you in terms of the implementation of these at a multi-level, in a multi-level way, right across the programs. And I look forward to our continued collaboration, Rosemary, and developing a plan and how we will actually support, and working through the National Intellectual Disability Memory Clinic, I think, as well, at a national level. We have a great opportunity to use these to support people. Okay, Mei-Lyn, thank you, Rosemary. Mei-Lyn, I might ask you for your response, and you have worked very closely in the development of the standard guidelines as well. So over to you, Mei-Lyn. Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Mary, for that lovely introduction. I am pleased to be part of today's webinar. I love working in TCID, and it means so much to me to be the Ambassador Liaison Officer. So many people come back to me to say thank you for speaking at conferences and for giving people with intellectual disabilities a voice. I really enjoy the validation and the recognition of the work that I do and the impact that I have. As Professor McCann has just said, it is really important for people to have supports if they develop dementia. I was part of the PPI panel that developed the guidelines and went to the recording studio to narrate the video. Like everyone, there is a possibility that I may develop dementia, and I feel very strongly that if it does happen, I will be involved in the conversation about my future. I know that I have an intellectual disability, and while it does impact the way I understand things, I am very lucky that I lead an independent life. I am able to have conversations, make my opinions, likes and dislikes known to people, even to those who don't know me very well. If I was to develop dementia, I feel confident that I would be listened to. I can tell people where I want to live, what activities I like to do, and who my best friends and family are. However, there are many people with intellectual disabilities who aren't able to speak or live independent lives. It is a struggle for them to read or write or make decisions. These are the people of whom the guidelines are the most important, so their wishes are respected. The guidelines are equally important for their families and staff too, because when you support the carers, then you support the person. So much good can be achieved by having accessible homes, good social circles, and access to activities that the person has enjoyed throughout their life. Friends, colleagues, and families and healthcare services are all interconnected when it comes to caring for someone with dementia. The guidelines show us how of these groups can work together, especially when things start to get difficult. Speaking for people with intellectual disabilities is my heart and my life, and I'm very passionate about this. After this webinar, I want people to say, wow, and realize that everyone can do something to make it easier for the person who is facing one of the most difficult challenges of their life. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Millen. And as always, it's such a pleasure, and you're such a tour de force when it comes to the work of the centre, and you keep us all in line in terms of what's really important. And you're just such a wonderful advocate for people with an intellectual disability. And I just want to say thank you for your sterling work and making sure that these standards are meaningful, and you work with the PPI panel in supporting that work to happen. So thank you, Millen. I'm going to now ask the panel members maybe to turn on their cameras for a couple of moments. And if people have particular questions that they want to put in or comments, please put them into the chat box. And there's just one comment that has come in. Well done to Millen, especially to Millen, as a mother and a carer of a daughter with Down syndrome. I'm delighted to see these guidelines, and I look forward to their implementation. I think all carers will understand the loss of self. I do not want to see their loved ones feel like this. So thank you very much, Jenny, for that comment. Okay, so please, if there is any other questions that people have, to put them into the Q&A box. There's just probably one or two questions that I might want to start with. Professor Kennelly, you talked about you know, advancements in coming down the line in terms of dementia care, and we know how difficult and complex diagnosis can often be for this population. How far away do you think that we are from biomarkers, and can you tell us something perhaps about the new therapeutics that you see are coming down the line that may be of help and give hope?
Thanks, Mary, and just to congratulate all the speakers, and especially yourself, Maylin, who spoke so eloquently about these new guidelines and their importance. Biomarkers are a term that we give to things we can measure that give an indication of a condition and are help us specifically diagnose a condition. I suppose from the point of view of dementia and Alzheimer's disease, the main biomarkers we've had over the last 5 to 10 years have been lumbar puncture, where we take a sample of spinal fluid and we're able to measure those proteins that I mentioned are associated with Alzheimer's disease. The exciting development is that over the next year or two, we'll probably be able to do similar by taking blood tests, which of course is much easier than having to put somebody through a lumbar puncture, which will give a very accurate diagnosis to the presence of those proteins. And it's very likely that over the next 1 to 2 years, those will be commercially available within laboratories, you know, to give a more accurate diagnosis. And that's the key word. It gives accuracy. There's so many people who present with different symptoms, which are related to many other things, which can often end up being misdiagnosed as dementia. And as important as it is to give a diagnosis of dementia, it's so important also that we're not misdiagnosing dementia or attribute any symptom that happens, you know, as somebody ages as a result of dementia. So accurate diagnosis and addressing those needs, because some of those needs can be pain, some of those needs can be medical issues that aren't addressed. So actually trying to make sure that those things are addressed is really important. And that's why those biomarkers are very important, is for accuracy. The other question is with regards to disease modifying therapies. Well, I mean, what's started happening is over the last 2 or 3 years, we're starting to see medicines come through that target these proteins and these accumulations. And while there was a recent negative viewpoint from the European Medicines Agency on one of those medicines, all other agencies around the world have actually adopted those into clinical practice. Where they're going to apply for people with Down syndrome and other forms of intellectual disability, I think still remains to be seen, because there is some increased risk probably associated with different populations, not just this population. There are some other vulnerable populations, and we're going to probably need a little bit more evidence over the next few years to see how they fit in. But what is really, really clear when we look at the pipeline of therapies that are coming through for Alzheimer's disease and other causes of dementia, there's over 100 different agents at different stages of clinical trials to address these. And hopefully it creates a vista that one day actually our diagnostics and our post-diagnostics and that need will have evolved with that. So I think it's certainly a time to be hopeful, but we also have to temper that with the expectation that we're still probably several years away from having a significant rollout of disease-modifying therapies in this population and indeed in the general population.
Thank you. And again, some comments coming in through the chat there, people in the question box that people can can ask really people saying, you know, very much how useful these will be. I always feel, and a much needed development, that's from Giles Glover, thank you Giles, from the UK. I always feel that no one probably goes out to maliciously give bad care. I feel often that people end up giving insensitive care, which is a very different thing. And Louise, as part of education and as part of your work, you know, how do you think we can get these guidelines, or the role of these guidelines now in I suppose, addressing my concern and those concerns?
I think, as Rosemary indicated earlier, it's about working together and using many different channels and many methods. We work hard with our undergraduate students at an early stage to build the fundamentals of understanding. And, you know, this can be reinforced in practice, and guidelines such as these can be taken and put into practice easily, because they're translated to a certain degree, and the final piece is actually using them. As Pamela gave some really practical ways in which you can not just implement them, but do education while implementing them on an ongoing basis. And then formal education programs, we have, you know, master's level here, postgrad diploma, certificate levels, and above. So we are able to do formal education, but the other forms of education are equally, and the ongoing reinforcement, and then the support for people who undertake education to actually be able to, you know, do what they then know needs to be done. So it's that circular kind of relationship, I think, is really, really important. And then we have other forms of national dementia education. So it's about mapping what's available, seeing how these meaningfully align with those, but what needs to be different in terms of really ensuring that the education fits the need of people delivering services, family caregivers, the person living with dementia themselves, and of course their peers, who are a very important population for people living with intellectual disability and dementia.
Thank you, Louise, around that. Thank you for that. Unfortunately, we have somebody saying that there was an echo of feedback, which was problematic. Hopefully that wasn't a problem for too many people during today's webinar. But we can certainly have recorded, the webinar has been recorded, and we will send that to people who have joined, and that will be up on site. Catherine Lydon, do the panel feel that there is more to be done to highlight the impact of carers on individuals' lives in terms of role recognition, whether paid or individual, or indeed family? Should philosophy around same be further explored? So this is very much around probably the impact of family caregivers. Laura, do you want to maybe respond to that?
Sure. Sorry, just so I'm sure I understand the question, is it the impact of caring on a family member?
Well, I think it's really around more to be done to highlight this issue of family caregiving, or whether the impact of caring and supporting somebody living with a dementia.
Oh, 100%. You know, I think our research and research, you know, across Ireland has consistently found that you know, caring and not having enough supports can increase physical and emotional challenges for family carers. So we at the Alzheimer's Society of Ireland do a huge amount of work in working with our politicians and also with the general public in highlighting the challenges faced by carers. And these even include financial challenges, psychological challenges, physical health needs, not being able to access supports. A lot of people talk about an administrative burden in trying to access financial supports and different supports and services. But I think what's positive here in Ireland is that, you know, with the Alzheimer's Society, we work very closely with, you know, academics, researchers, clinicians, and we are all working together to try and improve this situation. So in our most recent pre-budget submission, we've asked for several supports for people who are providing family care, and we're very hopeful that we'll receive some support from the government in the budget announced August 1st. So watch this space.
Yes, and I absolutely agree. And I think while we have great guidelines here, some of them are to do with skill and with attitude, and but some and definitely will require financial supports to make things like aging in place and environmental modifications. So Rosemary, we'll be also working with you in terms of budget submissions to ensure that we truly can action. I think these the guidelines here and the standards. I mean, these are the basic standards that we now have agreed that we aspire to for people with intellectual disability living with dementia, and we need to work hard collectively and together and through every avenue to make this happen. I'm not sure, Rosemary, if you want to comment on that.
Yeah, and I agree, absolutely agree, Mary. And I suppose it's going back to what Louise said, it's about, the person, and also, this rights-based approach is really important, that we're supporting people to meet their needs, their sense of self, all of those things that are really important for people, and that we utilize these guidelines. And I think one of the beauties of what was presented this morning is that there's processes and supports to implement the guidelines. It's not just a list of standards that we want, but you've got this process that aligns with that, which is really important. And I think it's really going back to that working as a collective, and also generating that, what I talked about, this consciousness to support, that people really work to drive this forward, rather than just being, I'm aware that this needs to happen, that we actually do need to try and work together to implement that across the whole sector. And I think it starts with, when we talk about education and training, that, even when we start, working with people who are in the professions, it starts within education, within the HEIs, and within programs, and also then, aligning it then to what's happening in practice. And there's lots of different ways to do that.
Okay, great. And one final question for you, Professor Kennelly. Can I ask Sean if it is possible to get lumbar puncture check to measure proteins, as I've had one done in April?
Yes, is the short answer. Of course, there's tolerability. However, we have done lumbar punctures through the National ID Memory Service here, and actually in other sites around the world that specialize in diagnosing in this context. They found good tolerability for people for doing LP. So yeah, lumbar punctures are available here, and indeed there's other memory services in the general population who are doing those now.
Okay. Thank you very much. I am concerned about the time. We have just slightly run over. It has been a long session this morning. I really want to thank, firstly, I want to thank everybody that has contributed so much to the development of the standards. People with an intellectual disability themselves, their families, the carers, services, the team who supported the development of the guidelines, and of course our funders. So thank you, Laura, and the Health Research Board and the IRC for that. I want to particularly thank our panel members here today, our speakers, Professor Sean Kennelly, Professor Louise Daly, Pamela Dunn, Laura O'Philippine, and Rosemary Gowan, and most critically, Maylin Yap. Thank you all so much for your input, and I think for making this a really great event. And the background team who are working hard in the background, particularly Mary Fitzpatrick and Gavin Dan, thank you. Thank you so much. They're available on the website. If people want to download them, they can download them. We have some printed copies. The films are also available. And we do hope that you can use these to really help people living with dementia to live well and to experience joy throughout the continuum. Thank you.